and this is our weekly reading of Prometheus Rising by Raw. Just a second. All right, Prometheus Rising presents a taxonomy of consciousness with 8 circuits and an implied evolutionary progression. We are reading it to explore ways to hack our consciousness for better living. All right, I'm Bubble, also known as Ali Wurds. I have a bachelor's degree in philosophy, and I've worked with and written about Prometheus Rising over the past 5 years. Last week we read chapter 3, and I guess it might be good to do sort of like a little overview of what we've done so far because there's a fair amount of content. So I'm just going to scroll back up to the table of contents to make it easy to summarize what we've looked at. All right, so first chapter was the thinker and the prover. We talked about how if you start thinking about something long enough, eventually you'll start coming up with ways to prove that it is true. And you can use that intentionally to change yourself. All right, the second chapter was on hardware and software, where Raw talked about how you can metaphorically think about the brain as a computer. He calls it a biocomputer. And the brain is like the hardware of your biocomputer. And the different mental processes that you have going on in your head are like the software. The third chapter was the oral biosurvival circuit. So we talked about what Robert Anton Wilson would describe as being like the first set of programs that get installed into your consciousness, and they have to do with a lot of your first experiences as an infant, potentially being imprinted on like the first mother figure you encounter, and I spoke about some animal examples like a giraffe that was imprinted on a jeep and a goose that was imprinted on a ping pong ball. Today we're going to talk about the fourth chapter, which is the anal emotional territorial circuit. And you'll notice with the oral and the anal that those are references to Freudian psychology. All right, and do we have any questions before we start? Or any comments? All right, if not, I'm going to go back to where we are in the book, which for the copy that I have is page 61. So that's chapter 4. And the image that you see on the screen right now is the image on page 61. So this chapter is called the Anal Emotional Territorial Circuit. And then we have a little poem that says, "Run, puppy, run. Run, puppy, run. Yonder comes the big dog. Run, puppy, run." And if you look at this diagram, you're going to see that there are a lot of references to the way animals mark their territory. And that's why, if you think about Freudian psychology, you have like anal retentive and anal expulsive. Those are sort of like the two directions that this circuit can be imprinted. So you'll see a lot of things about marking territory and like fecal matter or just like bodily functions. A lot of the lower circuits are about the body. All right, so starting on page 63 now. The second circuit, the emotional territorial networks of the brain, is concerned entirely with power politics. This patriotic circuit is built into all vertebrates and is perhaps 500 million to 1,000 million years old. In the modern human, it seems to be centralized in the thalamus, the back brain, or old brain, and is linked with the voluntary nervous system and the muscles. The circuit appears in each newborn when the DNA master tape sends out RNA messenger molecules to trigger the mutation from neonate to toddler, which involves, first of all, standing erect. Walking, mastering gravity, overcoming physical obstacles, and learning to manipulate others politically are the vulnerable points at which imprinting and heavy conditioning occur. The muscles that perform these power functions are quickly programmed with what becomes chronic, lifelong reflexes. Depending as always, the accidents of the environment. What happens at points of neurological vulnerability? This circuit will organize itself into a strong, dominating role in the pack or family, or a weak, submissive role. So depending on accidents of the environment, you or any organism really might be imprinted to have more of a dominant or submissive role according to this model. Without going into the jungles with the ethnologists, without going into the jungles with the ethologists, one can observe this mammalian imprinting process in any litter of puppies. It is very quickly determined who is top dog and who is bottom dog. Status in the pack or tribe is assigned on the basis of pre-verbal signaling systems, like kinesics, kinesthetic, like motion, in which these muscle reflexes are crucial. All of the emotional games or cons listed in the popular psychological game manuals of Dr. Eric Berne and the Transactional analysts are second circuit imprints or standard mammalian politics. To quote from my novel Schrodinger's Cat, most of the domesticated primates of Terra did not know they were primates. They thought they were something apart from and superior to the rest of the planet. Even Benny Benedict's 1 month to go column was based on that illusion. Benny had actually read Darwin once in college a long time ago, and had heard of sciences like ethology and ecology, but the facts of evolution had never really registered on him. He never thought of himself as a primate. He never realized his friends and associates were primates. Above all, he never understood that the alpha males of Unistat were typical leaders of primate bands. As a result of this inability to see the obvious, Benny was constantly alarmed and terrified by the behavior of himself, his friends, and associates, and especially the alpha males of the pack. Since he didn't know it was ordinary primate behavior, it just seemed awful to him. Since a great deal of primate behavior was considered just awful, most of the domesticated primates spent most of their time trying to conceal what they were doing. Some of the primates got caught by other primates. All of the primates lived in dread of getting caught. Those who got caught were called no-good shits. The term no-good shit was a deep expression of primate psychology. For instance, one wild primate, a chimpanzee, taught sign language by 2 domesticated primates, scientists, spontaneously put together the words, the signs, for shit and scientist to describe a scientist she didn't like. She was calling him shit scientist. She also put together the signs for shit and chimpanzee for another chimpanzee she didn't like. She was calling him shit chimpanzee. You no good shit domesticated primates often said to each other. This metaphor was deep in primate psychology because primates mark their territories with excretions, and sometimes they threw excretions at each other when disputing over territories. One primate wrote a long book describing in vivid detail how his political enemies should be punished. He imagined them in an enormous hole in the ground with flames and smoke and rivers of shit. This primate was Dante Alighieri. Another primate wrote that every primate infant goes through a stage of being chiefly concerned with biosurvival, i.e. food, i.e. mommy's titty. He also called this the oral stage. He said that the infant next went on to a stage of learning mammalian politics, i.e. recognizing the father, alpha male, and his authority and territorial demands. He called this, with an insight that few primates shared, the anal stage. This primate was named Freud. He had taken his own nervous system apart and examined its component circuits by periodically altering its structure with neurochemicals. Among the anal insults exchanged by domesticated primates when fighting for their space were "up your ass," "go shit in your hat," "you're full of shit," and many others. One of the most admired alpha males in the kingdom of the Franks was General Cambronne. General Cambronne won this adulation for the answer he gave when he asked to surrender at Waterloo. Merde was the answer General Cambronne gave. The word petard means a kind of bomb. It comes from the same Old English root as fart. General Cambronne's mentality was typical of the alpha males of the military caste. When primates went to war or got violent in other ways, they always said that they were about to knock the shit out of the enemy. They also spoke of dumping on each other. And this brings us to another image. Let me switch back over. So you see, this is a diagram of just like a line marking territory. It says border, go away. And presumably those piles of poop belong to different groups of apes. And then it's marked nationalism. All right. I guess this is an okay stopping point. Would anyone like to make any comments or ask any questions?
I guess I could ask something. There's a lot of examples being given here in a pretty short time. What would you say they are examples of exactly?
A lot of this is just examples of the way we use language mirrors a particular aspect of our psychology. I would honestly say that's most of it. Most of the examples in here, except of like literal animals, are just people using fecal metaphors to describe whether or not they like another person or group.
Right, something about tendencies to do with behavior and language, I guess. Yeah, that's interesting. Just wanted to hear that summarized. That's nice, thanks.
Yeah, that's good. Would anyone else like to say anything before we move on? All right, let's get back to where we were in the book. So we're on the second half of page 65. The standard authority reflex on the emotional territorial circuit is to swell the muscles and howl. You will find this among birds as well as mammals, and in the board meeting of your local bank. The standard submission reflex is to shrink the muscles, lower the head, and crawl away. You will find this among dogs, primates, fowl, and employees who wish to keep their jobs everywhere. If the first biosurvival circuit is chiefly imprinted by the mother, the second emotional territorial circuit is chiefly imprinted by the father, the nearest alpha male. It has been proposed by sociologist G. Rattray Taylor that the societies swing back and forth between matrist periods, in which motherly oral values dominate, and patrist periods, in which fatherly anal values are in ascendance. And that brings us to another picture. All right, so here you'll see just a diagram, or not even a diagram, just like a depiction of those same kinds of body postures. You have like a boss being an alpha male standing on top of a desk, howling, posing with strong muscles like an angry gorilla. And then you have someone groveling and presenting themselves in the most submissive way they can.
Yeah, what does it say on the paper there? Is it loan application?
Yeah, and there's
so.
the word no on it. Yeah, loan application.
All right.
I guess they're being denied a loan from their bank.
Yeah, something like that.
Or, yeah. All right, down to page 67. Taylor's table of the characteristics of these matrist and patrist periods are as follows. I'm just going to go down the list. I guess it might be interesting to compare, so I'm going to alternate. So the first matrist trait that is listed is permissive towards sex, and then on the patrist side, restrictive towards sex. Freedom for women, limitation of freedom for women. Women have high status, women have low status. Chastity not valued, chastity highly valued. Egalitarian, authoritarian. Progressive, conservative. No distrust of research, distrust of research. Spontaneous, inhibitions. Sex difference minimized, sex differences maximized. Fear of incest, fear of homosexuality. Hedonic, aesthetic. Mother goddess, father god. And I think I included a picture of that one. Nope, I guess not. Okay. Whether or not societies wobble between these extremes, as Taylor claims, individuals certainly do. These are merely the consequences of A, having the heaviest imprint on the oral, matrist, biosurvival circuit, or B, having the heaviest imprint on the anal, patrist, territorial circuit. In pre-ethological terms, the emotional territorial circuit is what we usually call ego. Ego is simply the mammalian recognition of one's status in the pack. It is a role, as sociologists say, a single brain circuit which mistakes itself for the whole self, the entire brain-mind apparatus. The egotist behaves like a 2-year-old in the common saying, because ego is the imprint of the toddling and toilet training stage. This is how the question of how human an animal is, especially a pet dog or cat, never ceases to divide scientists from laypersons, and one scientist from another. In terms of the present theory, the differences between domesticated primates, humans, and other domesticated animals are virtually nil, as long as we are talking only about the first 2 circuits. Since most people spend most of their time on these primitive circuits, the differences are often much less obvious than the similarities. Real differences begin to appear when the 3rd semantic circuit enters the picture. And that brings us to another diagram. So we see here 2 very 2nd circuit imprinted individuals that, for all intents and purposes, are identical, and they're just standing right across from each other. And it says, most mammals mark their territories with excretions. Domesticated primates mark their territories with ink excretions on paper. All right. For instance, novice dog trainers always make the mistake of using too many words. Because the dog is so human in so many ways, canines, like primates, are great mimics. The novice imputes to them. The average dog has a vocabulary of around 150 words, and within that semantic universe is quite bright. It is very easy to teach a dog the meaning of sit, stay, attack, etc., and the dog will learn the meaning of walk and food even without your trying to teach him. The problem begins when the novice expects the word to understand something like, no, no, Fritz, anywhere else in the bedroom but not on the bed. Even a non-English speaking human would not grasp that except vaguely. The dog gives up on such sentences and guesses what he can from your mammalian and unconscious body language. Understanding these distinctions can vastly improve primate-canine communication. For instance, my wife, a sociologist, trained our dog, Eng, not to beg at the table in the most direct mammalian language possible. She simply growled at him the first few times he approached her while she was eating. She had been reading ethology, of course. Fang understood fully. He soon learned to avoid the table when the pack leaders, my wife and myself, were eating. His genetic programs told him we were the big dogs, or as close to the big dogs as he could find in that environment. Dogs, like wolves, have a genetic program about not annoying the big dogs while they're eating. The growl told him all he needed to know about the local parameters of that rule. Fang, incidentally, was a dachshund Labrador mix. Dachshund, I'm saying it wrong probably, but yeah, and strange looking to most humans. People would stop me on the street while I was walking and ask, what is that? Persons, extreme cases, who take the heaviest imprint on this territorial emotional circuit tend to be musculotonic. That is, they hold most of their attention and energy in the muscular attack defense systems and grow up medium weight, heavy enough to be hard to knock down, light enough to be quick and sinewy. Often they become bodybuilders, weightlifters, etc., and have an extraordinary absorption in demonstrating their strength. Even shaking hands with them, you get the message that they are not exchanging amity, but demonstrating power. Most societies shun these types into the military, where their propensities are put to proper ethological use, defending the tribal turf. The anal orientation of this circuit explains the oddity of military speech, first noted by Norman Mailer. Ass means one's whole self, and shit means all surrounding circumstances. That brings us to our next picture. You see a suggestion of how people who have been imprinted in different ways might look. So Robert Anton Wilson here is suggesting that people whose psychology is heavily dominated by the first circuit tend to have a viscerotonic body type, and that people who have been imprinted heavily in the second circuit type tend to have more of a musculotonic body type. I don't know how scientifically valid this is, but it is certainly a suggestion. All right. It's saying that imprinting affects the whole nervous system. The nervous system affects the whole body. All All right, that brings us to our next diagram. Would anyone like to say or ask anything about this diagram here before we go to the next one? All right, let's look at the next one. So now this next one here brings together our first two circuits. So each circuit is like an axis in a many-dimensional, ultimately 8-dimensional space. So left and right, we see retreat and advance. If you recall, that is the imprinting for our first circuit. So if you have a more pleasant first circuit imprinting, you are more likely to advance towards things that you find pleasant, whereas if you have a less desirable, maybe I should say, first circuit imprinting, you're more likely to focus your energy towards retreating from things that are unpleasant. Similarly, you can be imprinted more towards dominance or submission in your second circuit. And this gives us 4 general quadrants that get talked about in a number of ways. So in the top left, it says, I give orders here. So this is someone that is focused on the things that are negative around them that they don't want, but they also are acting in a way that is dominant. Top right says, it's safe out here. So that's someone that is advancing into a location that they're deeming safe. And by declaring that, they're declaring that for other people that are still acting in a dominant way. On the bottom row, we have, bottom left, it says, Mommy, take me home. So they're retreating and they're looking externally to themselves for help. So they're being submissive by looking externally, and they're trying to get away from something unpleasant. Bottom right says, please tell me what to do. So it's still someone looking externally, but they are doing it in a way where they're trying to move outwards towards something that is going to be helpful or beneficial in some way. Would anyone like to say or comment, say or ask anything about this diagram here?
I think you explained very well, thanks.
Okay. That brings us to yet another. There are a whole bunch of diagrams back to back in this chapter. All right. So same kind of thing again, but you'll notice, I guess I'll start with the paragraph that's there. It says, the grid of circuits 1 and 2 creates 4 quadrants. Note that the hostile strength, the tyrant, is inclined to paranoid withdrawal. He must govern, but he is also afraid. The careers of Hitler, Stalin, Howard Hughes, etc., and the inaccessible castle and court in Kafka's allegories. Note also the dependent neurotic is not in retreat at all. He or she advances upon you, demanding fulfillment of emotional needs. So you see that there are 4 general types of personalities, you could say. So we have the tyrant, which is like hostile strength, the good parent, which is friendly strength, the paranoid, which is hostile weakness, and the dependent neurotic, which is friendly weakness. All right, let's go to our next diagrams. So we have 2 diagrams on this page. I'm going to start reading at the top of page 73. That's where we're at right now. The 4 quadrants have been known since the dawn of self-consciousness. For instance, in the terminology of the medieval psychology of humors, these 4 imprint types are known as bilious humor, so that's hostile strength, sanguinary humor, friendly strength, choleric humor, hostile weakness, phlegmatic humor, friendly weakness. Clockwise, the sanguinary type, friendly strength, was identified with the lion archetype and the element fire. The lion because the dignity of these big cats represents good strength, and the fire represents power. The phlegmatic type, friendly weakness, was identified with the angel archetype and the element water. These people are too sensitive to fight and go with the flow. The choleric types were identified with the bull archetype, truculent suspicion, paranoia, and the element earth, standing for sluggish pseudo-stupidity. This is the traditional stance of defeated races dealing with their conquerors. The bilious types, hostile strength, were identified with the eagle archetype, symbol of imperial Rome, the German royal family. And the element air probably means sky because these types seem high and mighty. These symbols go back a long way. Kabbalists find them in the Old Testament, where indeed the lion, angel, bull, eagle appear in Ezekiel. They are found constantly in Catholic art, associated with the four evangelists. Matthew is the angel, Mark the lion, Luke the bull, and John the eagle. And then there's a note at the bottom that says, these are the four old men in Finnegan's Wake. Matt Gregory, because his last name contains ego. Ego is found in the middle of Gregory, the three middle letters. And ego equals the angel. Marcus Leon equals the lion. Luke Tarpey equals tar, which is bull. And Johnny McDougal equals oogle. If you take out the O-U-G-A-L at the end, it's a slight transposition to turn into eagle. All right. You'll find that there are a lot of digressions into Finnegan's Wake, and I see a hand going.
Yeah, just really quickly, these four humors, right? Aren't they connected to bodily functions in some way? Like I see bile, sanguinary, that's blood. Phlegmatic, I think that's saliva or something, right? And what is the choleric? I mean, this is weird medieval alchemical stuff at this point, but I'm kind of curious. Do you know anything about that, Bubble?
Yeah, a little bit. It looks like I see a hand up there. Someone probably knows more about the humors than me.
Yeah, not that much though. You can explain it, but yeah, it's outdated medical theory.
For sure, but I was just curious what the details were, about the quote-unquote correspondences here.
Yeah, I have another point to make. Bubble, can you please explain the humors?
Yeah. So, my exposure to it is mostly through like Shakespeare, but like it was believed that they were both like physical things, like the sanguinary humor is in fact your blood and bile is in your stomach. And there are relationships between like your psychology and especially like bile or the motion of your blood. I don't remember offhand exactly what choler was, but phlegmatic. So the idea was that you would balance your humors either mentally to bring your body into health, or you could attempt to balance your different bodily fluids, and hopefully it would bring you psychological health as well.
That's far out. Thanks.
Yeah, the point that I wanted to make was that the imagery here is flipped from how it is usually represented. The angel or man is usually represented as an air element, and the eagle is usually represented as water. Not sure why.
Well, I think that also depends.
Interesting.
Just going from memory, I think man is water through Aquarius, and the eagle then still air. But I think that depends, and it's also disagreed on in Golden Dawn and so forth. But we can talk about that later.
Aquarius is an air sign, though.
Hmm?
Aquarius is an air sign.
Yeah, for sure. It's a very weird subject, but let's talk about it more later, maybe after the reading.
Sure.
All right. If no one else would like to say anything, then we're going to move on. All right. So we just went through that little digression, and the last thing it says is that we also see these in the design of tarot card decks, medieval and modern. So down on the page 74, this is where we have our second diagram that we still have on the screen. In the clever language of the fashionable transactional analysis system, these four imprint types are categorized as the four basic life scripts, to wit. So same thing, so our hostile strength is I'm okay, you're not okay. Sanguinary, friendly strength is I'm okay, you're okay. Choleric, hostile weakness, I'm not okay, you're not okay. Phlegmatic, friendly weakness, I'm not okay, you're okay. So you can see that the first circuit, let me make sure I'm getting this right. So the second circuit actually has to do with, I'm going to say this backwards. All right, so the first circuit is about whether or not you yourself are okay or not, and then the second circuit is more about like other people. So like the infant is initially just aware of mostly themselves and what they want or need. And then once you start getting into the second circuit and it becomes more territorial, it's about like what other people want or need. So that's why you have those two, like, I'm okay, you're not okay. So going on, it is the phlegmatic, friendly weakness dependent neurotic type who generally turn up in the psychotherapist's office seeking re-imprinting voluntarily. They are not okay, but they have great faith that the therapist is okay. The bilious, hostile strength and choleric, hostile weakness arrive in therapy, if at all, only because their associates or families, or more commonly a law court, has ordered them to try to re-imprint their compulsive hostilities. The sanguinary, friendly strength type virtually never comes for psychotherapy. He or she is satisfied with his or her life, and so is the rest of society. Alas, they nonetheless can get to the position where they need therapy of some sort simply because they may take on too much responsibility and carry too many burdens. They will generally arrive at the therapist only if sent there by an MD who has intuited where their ulcers came from. This system is not meant to be rigid or to imply that there are only 4 types of humanoid robots. The later circuits, still to be discussed, modify all of this considerably. Some circuits are wobbly, cover 2 or more quadrants partly, and we are all capable of sudden brain change. It is also important to realize that the 4 archetypes are for convenience only, and they are convenient, as witness their reappearance in transactional analysis, where their historical connection with the lion, angel, bull, eagle isn't even recognized. But each quadrant can be subdivided much more sharply if necessary for diagnostic purposes. For instance, the most widely used psychological test in this country, the Leary Interpersonal Grid from 1957, divides the 4 quadrants into 16 subquadrants, and allows one to grade each in terms of moderate to excessive tendency to behave that way. In the grid on which the Leary categories are drawn, the moderate imprints are in toward the center, and the excessive or extreme cases are out towards the perimeter. But what is being measured is still basically the way the first 2 circuits, oral biosurvival and anal territorial, are imprinted. To clarify this a bit further, imagine that 4 babies were all born at the same instant in John J. Boskowitz Memorial Hospital, Anytown, planet Earth. We come back 20 years later, and we find that each of them has a separate personality and lifestyle, a problem for the astrologers, but let that pass. To make things easier for us, they have actually landed in our 4 quadrants. Subject 1 is responsible, over-conventional, sanguinary. Everyone agrees that she, the S and the H are both capitalized, so it's she or he, is usually a beloved community leader, helpful, considerate, friendly, and solidly successful. Some may even say she spoils people with kindness, forgives anything, agrees with everybody, and actually enjoys governing those who cannot govern themselves, the noble lion. This person may be, and probably is, a total robot. That is, if she can never give orders in a strict way, is never able to doubt others, is never ego-centered, etc., then she has mechanically imprinted the first quadrant friendly strength. On the other hand, if she is able to move out of the first quadrant in appropriate situations, exercising hostility against the marauder or predator, admitting weakness when overwhelmed, she has an imprinted conditioned predilection for I'm okay, you're okay, but is not totally robotized by it. And this brings us to a picture of our grid. Now, I realize that in the original document, as far as I can tell, it's actually really hard to read even if you zoom in.
Yeah, I've got the printed version right here, and it's completely illegible. You can't make out any of the words whatsoever.
If I zoom in really far, I can sort of make out some of it. But I guess if you really want to see it, you probably want to Google the Leary Interpersonal Grid, and there's probably like some color-coded versions of it out there.
I'll try to throw one in the Discord later for anybody that's interested.
Yeah, but it is basically those 4 quadrants, and they've been subdivided again into 4, which gets you 16 categories. And then the further out on the circle you are, the more extreme, I think it is. Yes. And then if you're closer to the center, then it is much more mild, whatever that characteristic is. All right, that brings us to our next page. Here you'll see a depiction of those same 4 quadrants, but as astrological signs. And it says, the 4 quadrants have been recognized in many ages and expressed in many symbols. All right, on the page 78, subject number 2 has, after the same 20 years of imprinting and conditioning, landed in quadrant 2, friendly weakness, phlegmatic. She is self-critical, shy, timid, easily led, spineless, and always looking for somebody to take charge and give orders. The unearthly angel, or in modern symbolism, the flower child. Again, this imprinting conditioning may be totally robotic, or there may be enough flexibility for the person to jump into another quadrant when necessary. Subject 3 had landed with total robothood, or with some small flexibility, in quadrant 3, hostile weakness, choleric. She distrusts everybody, rebels against everything, speaks constantly in sarcasms, complains chronically, and is generally bitter, resentful, and to some extent paranoid. A sullen bull. Subject 4 has landed in quadrant 4, hostile strength, bilious, and is regarded as bossy, cold, unfeeling, dictatorial, self-important, boastful, etc., but still in the judgment of most, a good leader, the imperial eagle. The irony and the tragedy of human life is that none of these subjects are aware at all of the robotry. Each will explain to you at great length and with great conviction why each of these robotic, endlessly repeated reflexes are caused by the situations around them, by the bad behavior of other people. What the thinker thinks, the prover proves. Thus, if you put these 4 primates on a desert island, you can predict with virtually as much certainty as a chemist telling us what will happen if 4 elements are compounded, that subjects 1 and 4, friendly strength and hostile strength, will both try to take over. 1 to help others, 4 because she can't imagine anybody else in control. 1 will submit to number 4 because 1 wants things to run smoothly for the good of all, and they never will run smoothly if number 4 is not top dog. Number 2, friendly weakness, will not care whether 1 or 4 rules, just so long as somebody else is making the decisions. And number 3 will complain and complain and complain, no matter who is in charge, while skillfully avoiding any action that would require taking personal responsibility. The same political decisions would be made by 4 chimpanzees or 4 dogs if they have the 4 imprint quadrants equally divided as in our hypothetical example. Sociobiologists, who are very aware of these 4 quadrants in both human and animal societies, claim that each organism is born with a genetic predisposition to play one of those roles. Critics of sociobiology, who are dogmatic liberals, denounce this idea as monstrous. We will not attempt to decide the difficult question here, since any attempt to decide what aspects of behavior are genetic and what are learned after birth always descends into ideological metaphysics in the prevailing absence of real data. We will say merely that, whether or not you or I were born with a predisposition for one quadrant, all organisms are born with a predisposition for imprint vulnerability, and the imprint, once set into neurochemical circuitry, acts as robotically as any genetic hardwiring. How imprints can be changed will be discussed as we proceed. The exercises in each chapter are intended to make imprints a little less rigid, a little more flexible. The top 2 quadrants of the Leary grid, friendly strength and hostile strength, correspond roughly to what Nietzsche called the Herrenmoral, the ethics of ruling classes. Indeed, hostile strength is the embodiment of Nietzsche's blonde beast, the primitive conqueror pirate type we find at the dawn of every civilization. This is what Nietzsche also called the animal or unsublimated form of the will to power. Friendly strength, on the other hand, does not correspond except very slightly to Nietzsche's sublimated will to power. To find that, we will have to wait until we come to the 5th neurosomatic circuit, the stages of conscious evolution. The bottom 2 quadrants, friendly weakness and hostile weakness, correspond to Nietzsche's Sklavmoral, the ethics of slaves, serfs, and lower caste or lower class persons everywhere. Nietzsche's concept of resentment, the hidden revenge motive within altruistic philosophies, claims that there is an element of hostility within even the friendly weakness side of the grid, i.e. in conventional Christian ethics, as typified by the image of gentle Jesus, meek and mild. This paradox, the friendly weakling is a hostile weakling in disguise. The flower child, a potential Mansonized robot killer, reappears in modern modern clinical parlance as the concept of passive-aggressive. Occultists, in their strange jargon, describe these types as psychic vampires. This is why Nietzsche claimed that St. Paul had destroyed the evangel, good news of Jesus, and replaced it with a disangel, bad news. The evangel of Jesus, as Nietzsche saw it, was the sublimated will to power, the path of conscious evolution to superhumanity. The disangel, the bad news created by St. Paul, was traditional sklavmoral. Slaves obey your masters, but nourish your resentment with the firm belief that you are good, and they are evil, and you will eventually have the pleasure of watching them burn in hell forever. In Nietzsche's analysis, all Marx added to this was the idea of burning and punishing the master class here and now, instead of waiting for God to attend to the matter post-mortem. The same analysis appears in E. E. Cummings' unforgettable couplet on the communist intelligentsia of the 1930s. Every comrade is a little bit of concentrated hate. It is interesting in this connection that Nietzsche dropped psychological language from his books as he went along and replaced it with physiological language. For instance, in his later works such as The Antichrist, the resentment within slave morality, conventional Christianity, is diagnosed as a physiological reaction characteristic of certain physical types. Nietzsche was on the right track, but lacking neurology, he looked for the physical basis of these processes in genetics alone. Imprinting theory suggests on the contrary that such physiological bottom dog reflexes are created by specific triggers at early moments of imprint vulnerability. But they are nonetheless all over the body at once, and hence physiological. Any method actor knows this, and his body will swell physically if he is playing a strong character, and shrink if he is playing a weakling. Rod Steiger, in particular, actually seems taller or shorter depending on whether he is playing a top dog or a bottom dog. Alright, I'm going to pause there because we went over a lot of stuff. Would anyone like to say anything or ask anything?
Nobody else has any questions. Maybe a short recap in your view of the last bit we went over.
Yeah, so we actually went over a lot. So, we talked about how if people act robotically in their imprinting, it can be fairly easy to predict how they'll behave, especially in an isolated situation like a desert island. And that a lot of the time, the reason people allow themselves to behave robotically is because they believe that their behaviors are caused by the situations around them, that they're just doing the most reasonable thing based on their own values and programs, their imprinting, based on the situations they're in. And if you do believe that your behavior is caused by your environment, you will eventually prove that. What the thinker thinks, the prover proves. Going down a little bit, it starts getting into sociobiology and Nietzsche, which introduces a very large amount of jargon, probably, for people that aren't familiar with him and his writing. But basically that you can characterize, so a lot of what it's talking about here comes down to Nietzsche's genealogy of morality and talking about how the slave morality, as he called it, represented by Christianity after Christ's death, caused a lot of people to behave in a way in which they appear to be imprinted in like a friendly weakness kind of way, but actually there's like a hidden hostility in it, especially with the idea of resentment, like resenting the ruling classes, because especially early on in Christianity, Christians were largely lower class people living.
Can I ask if anybody here wants to read more about this particular jargon of Nietzsche and his model that's being represented here? Do you know which book one might look up?
Yeah, so the whole thing with slave morality and master morality gets introduced in the genealogy of morality. Yeah, genealogy of morality. If you're interested in a play or novella that's like a depiction of someone he thought had gone beyond humanity, Thus Spake Zarathustra, or sometimes, depending on the translation, also spoke Zarathustra, is a relatively short and enjoyable novella. It's like an allegory for how to become an Ubermensch or an overman, like how to transcend humanity.
Interesting.
So those would probably be the two best starting points. I'm not really an expert on him though. Like he wrote a lot, and his views changed a lot between books.
For sure, that's a good call out. Thanks.
All right. Yeah. So that's basically what we just looked at. If you're interested in like the whole masterclass thing, the master-slave dialectic is also brought up by Hegel, and then it gets applied economically by Marx. So those would be other people to look into if you're interested in that. All right. And then we talked about how like method actors, by changing their body, by changing their body language, they can change a lot about themselves. That the psychology is connected to the physiology. All right, and then back to page 81. Remember again that all these categories are for convenience, and that nature has not employed the sharp boundaries that we use in our models of nature. Thus, with Leary's 1957 schemata, we can further subdivide our 4 types into 16 types with 4 degrees of each, for a total of 64 subtypes. In the next section, to simplify what may be growing too complex, we will reduce everything again just to the interactions of the first 2 circuits. Any system for describing human behavior should be flexible enough to be extended indefinitely, and should also contain meaning when reduced back to its fundamentals. Since we all contain a territorial emotional circuit, we need to exercise it daily. Playing with children is one good exercise, especially if you play large groups. In which case you will have to referee mammalian territorial disputes. Swimming, jogging, or whatever else appeals to you is good to keep the muscles from feeling you are trying to starve them. Trying to psych out somebody else's emotional state is one of the best exercises for this circuit, and is very educational in general. It activates the old mammal sensors in the thalamus, where body language communicates emotional signals. A good general uses this circuit to psych out what the enemy general is planning. A good mother uses it, vice versa, to figure out what baby's howl means in each particular case. Advanced work with this circuit involves some hazards in personal relations. It would involve such games as learning to bully somebody if you've never been able to do that before, learning to submit docilely if you've never been able to do that before, and learning to express anger appropriately and letting go of it when it is no longer necessary. It will be observed by the thoughtful or visually oriented readers that each extreme type can be expressed on the Leary grid as an off-center pie slice. And let's go to our next diagram. So we got 3 on this page. Currently we're looking at the top one. It's really just a depiction of the same thing you've seen like 3 or 4 times now. But just showing how the more extreme cases are further out on that circle. Obviously, an ideally balanced person, that is, one not robotized, would be able to adjust to circumstances as they arise, would not be so off-centered. Such a person would be able to move a little bit into each quadrant according to the times and seasons, as the Chinese say, but would basically maintain a centered detachment between all of them. She or he could be graphed as a circle, so you see the circle with a bunch of dots. The dark inner circle would represent the adamantine individuality of this ideally detached person, detached from robot imprints. The gray circle would represent the ability to move out into each quadrant in times when that was necessary. Circles of this sort, called mandalas, are widely used for meditation in the Buddhist tradition. Often they are cornered by 4 demons who, evidently, like the Occidental lion, bull, angel, and eagle, represent the extremes to be avoided. Alright, and then at the bottom we have a mandala and a little quote, again from Finnegan's Wake. You're going to see Finnegan's Wake quoted throughout this book. It says, "Being humus, the same returns." And if you're not familiar with Finnegan's Wake, almost every word is going to be a multilingual pun, like except for the word like the and same here. Although with more context, you might find puns everywhere. But a translation that I would suggest is that being human, the same returns. And you have like a mandala as a circle. Finnegan's Wake itself, the book ends halfway through a sentence, and then the beginning of the book is the second half of that same sentence. So the whole book is a cycle that is based on a quadrant cycle, but also mapped onto the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And Robert Anton Wilson called it his Bible. So you're going to see it referenced through a lot of his works. All right, and now we're on to the exercises. Is there anything people would like to say before we go over the exercises? All right, so first one. Oh, and there are a couple footnotes. No, they go with the exercises. Okay, first one. Whenever you meet a young male or female, ask yourself consciously, if it came to hand-to-hand combat, could I beat him or her? Then try to determine how much of your behavior is based on unconsciously asking and answering that question via pre-verbal body language. 2. Get roaring drunk and pound the table, telling everybody in a loud voice just what dumb assholes they all are. And I want to pause here again and mention that throughout the book, Robert Anton Wilson is going to suggest that various neurochemicals, various substances, can be used to intentionally modify your programs or which quadrant you tend to be in, at least under the influence. And that is by no means a prescription to actually consume those compounds. You can definitely you can activate any neuroreceptors that are in your head theoretically through like meditation and trance. So such chemicals are not strictly needed. And of course, be aware of any like legal or physical risks that are associated with them. So he says, get roaring drunk and pound the table, telling everybody in a loud voice just what dumb assholes they are. And then there's a note. Opiates and small doses of alcohol seem to trigger neurotransmitters characteristic of circuit 1 breastfed tranquility. Large doses of alcohol often reverse this and trigger neurotransmitters characteristic of territorial struggle. Note the anal vocabulary of hostile drunks as their alcoholic intake increases. All right, 3. Get a book on meditation, practice for 2 15-minute sessions every day for a month, then go see somebody who always manages to upset you or make you defensive. See if they can still press your territorial retreat buttons. And we have a footnote. A good book on meditation is Undoing Yourself with Energized Meditation and Other Practices by Christopher S. Hyatt. And I think I read that one. I've read a couple things by Hyatt. His books are generally pretty useful. All right, 4.
We also got a good one in the library, right?
Oh yeah, which one do we have in the library?
It's the highlighted one, the top one pick on the pedestal. It's called The Mind Illuminated. It's also available for free on archive.org by John Yates.
Cool. All right. 4 says, spend a weekend at an encounter group. During the first half day, try to intuit which quadrant each participant is coming from. At the end, see if any of them have become less robotized. See if you have become less robotized. 5. Go to the lion house at the zoo. Study the lions until you feel you really understand their tunnel reality. I'm going to pause there because throughout this book, Robert Anton Wilson is going to talk about reality tunnels. And the idea there is that based on the mental programs that you're running, you create sort of like a tunnel of phenomenal reality, like the combination of perceptions. In philosophy, there's a distinction between the phenomenal world and the noumenal world. So the phenomenal world is things as they are experienced, and then the noumenal world is whatever lies beneath that we don't ever directly experience except perhaps in some sort of mystical state. So the programs that you're running in your brain produce a tunnel of reality that may or may not intersect with other people. All right. 6. Rent a video of the kind of comedy that small children like. The Three Stooges, Abbott and Costello, etc. Observe carefully and think about what function this humor serves, but don't neglect to laugh at it yourself. 7. Spend all day Sunday looking at animal shows on TV, getting stoned on weed if this is permissible to you, then go into the office the next day and observe the primate pack hierarchy carefully like a scientist. So again, if he suggests something that is not safe to you or legal in your area, just don't do that. You can just watch some animal documentaries and then if you don't work in an office, like he, I guess, assumes, just anywhere where you're around people predictably, and then try to analyze people watch in terms of different kinds of animal reality tunnels. And you might find yourself comparing the body language of people to different sorts of animals. And it can just be a really fun activity. I like to do that at the zoo with the animals, is the other direction. What kind of person is this animal like? And that brings us to the end of our chapter. So that is chapter 4. Any comments or questions? I guess we will end it there, and next week we will pick up on chapter 5, which is about the way those two circuits relate to each other. And let me go over to... Alright, so thank you all for coming to today's session. There'll be a recording of it up on YouTube in the coming days, and please join us again next week at the same day and time. You can follow what I do outside vrchat at my link tree, which is linktree/elephantwords. That's linktr.ee/elephantwords. And if you haven't already, join the VRM Discord. We have a URL in the lobby. And please consider supporting VRM by donating, supporting on Patreon, or becoming a volunteer. More information at vrmystery.school/support. This is the end of today's session, but feel free to mingle in the lounge.